Hello and welcome to How to Survive Healthcare. I am Kayla Thompson-Riviere. I have over a decade of experience as an RN in the ER and ICU. Now I'm helping people as a dedicated advocate.
And I'm Nicole Broadhurst, a healthcare billing specialist and financial advocate, here to make sure you're not paying more than you owe.
We're here to share the insider tips and tricks you need to navigate the healthcare system, avoid common pitfalls, and get the care you deserve.
Because no one should feel lost or overwhelmed when it comes to their health.
Now, it is important to note that the information we share on this podcast is based on our experience and research, but it's not intended to replace professional medical advice. But whether you're a patient or a caregiver, you're in the right place. Hello. Welcome back. Happy New Year 2025. Although my thing is, who decided to put the new year in the dead of winter? It drives me nuts. I'm like, why don't we celebrate the new year in springtime when everything's coming back to life? But that's another
because we need inspiration in the middle of winter.
I guess it's just so arbitrary. I call it calendar change day. I don't really celebrate.
Oh, there you go.
But...
Okay. I like it.
But good to see you again this year, Nicole.
Good to see you, Kayla.
So as we move into this arbitrary new year, last week we talked about planning out your new year for healthcare. And if you started taking some action steps on that and perhaps started making some phone calls to get those appointments scheduled, there's a possibility you may have noticed that the healthcare system isn't really set up for the end user. And it can be a little frustrating. Nicole, have you ever experienced this?
Nicely put. Yes. As a matter of fact, most days I experience this, right?
I know,
mean,
it's
a
wild.
real thing.
I say it all the time. I'm like, I don't know who it's set up for, but it certainly is not for the patients, not for the families. Right. And you know what, guys? As being somebody who's spent over a decade on the other side of the stretcher, it ain't set up for the people who are taking care of you either. Your doctors and nurses and therapists and whatever. And we can sit here and make speculations about who it's set up for. I'm going to say probably pharmacy benefit managers, but
insurance carriers, maybe.
Yeah. But today we wanted to first acknowledge that. And I want to hold some space that, it is frustrating, and it's not just you. You're not alone on that journey. And more so than talk about the frustration, we really want to give you some strategies for how to cope with it, and also why it's important too. Because while in my opinion, it shouldn't be your responsibility to have to cope with and figure out how to manage the healthcare system, but that is the reality that we're in at this time today. Hopefully that will change in the future. But right now, this is the screwed up world that we're in. And I want you to be able to have the tools to get through it a little bit better. So
these are our lemons, and we're hopefully going to show you how to make some lemonade today.
Right. Because there is a cost to letting frustration take over when it comes to the care of yourself or your loved one. And I know Nicole and I have both seen it on both sides of the coin, on the patient advocate perspective, and then also on the being in the system perspective. Nicole, do you have something to share about that?
Well, I think it's really interesting because, you just said the cost of this frustration. It is. So in addition to validating that the frustration is real, I also kind of wanted to make sure we talk about frustration is not isolated to patients and families, right? I mean, the frustration is felt on both sides. Providers are frustrated, doctors, nurses, techs, radiology techs, everybody feels the pressure of the system. And I think that it's really important that we acknowledge all of that, because when we really think about it, and we think about all of the people that are frustrated and challenged and feeling the pressure and the stress and the frustration, it's not really a wonder that it's a mess, right? Because everybody's just trying to survive in the middle of all of this chaos. So to get to the point of where we're talking about, the cost of letting the frustration take over, it just introduces and creates an even worse situation and increases the amount of animosity, because everybody is showing up trying to do their best.
Right.
And anytime it isn't look, I used to tell my son all the time when he was growing up, look, mommy does her best, and sometimes her best is not enough. And I just think that we all need to kind of remember that to give us some perspective in this situation, as we validate and say, it's happening to all of us. We're not alone. You're not alone in what you're feeling. What you're feeling is real. It is valid. And what are some things that we can do to offset it so that it doesn't create additional problems?
Right.
So that's what I think about, is because it only takes one thing, right? And then all of a sudden we're in a spiral of bad things.
Exactly. And I know I've seen a lot of times in healthcare, when you're going through a circumstance, either personally or with your loved one, it oftentimes can feel like a battle for care. And it oftentimes is a battle to get them the appropriate care. But what we don't want is it to be a you versus them battle. We don't want to create a dynamic where, we feel like we're fighting against the care team, for a lot of reasons. So I see this happen, and I understand exactly how it happens. Something got missed with, let's say it's your mom's care. Something got missed with mom's care, and now something bad happened to mom. And you're emotional and you're upset, and you should be upset about that. However, there's that phrase, like, don't bite the hand that feeds you. The care team, though they may be the ones who let you down, they're also the ones that you have to continue to work with to get any sort of, rectification of this situation. So when a family member comes in real hot and heavy and letting that frustration take over, and, pissed with the screaming at the hospital staff, that's not going to help mom's care.
No.
It's not going to help her get better. It's not going to fix the situation that occurred in the first place. If anything, it's probably going to affect her care negatively. Because when that happens, I can tell you firsthand, you have now just made your mom labeled as a patient with a difficult family. And now the staff is going to do everything they can to avoid communication with you and the family. And we know that medical errors and bad things happening to patients most of the time is because of a breakdown in communication. And having family presence through the hospital stay, or even just if it's appointments, makes a huge difference in how well a patient has an outcome. So when you break down that integral piece of being able to effectively communicate with the care team and advocate for your family member, when you start to break that down, you're making the situation worse. And this is where I want to say, right, again, it shouldn't be on you. You should be able to, have the negative feelings and express them, but it is what it is kind of a situation. And we don't we don't want things to go from bad to worse.
Right. Well, Kayla, I think some of this too, though, I think, the bigger picture of this is that what you just said, like it is, my experience has been when things go awry in the healthcare setting, it is less likely a person problem and much more likely a system or process problem.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Almost
And
unanimously.
right. And I think that's where we start to feel very powerless, is that as patients and families, we don't have much input on processes. We don't have much input on correcting processes. And therefore, that frustration that we feel tends to come out at the person and the people involved. And that's what I think this episode is really about, is how do we re-channel that energy instead of towards the people in the situation, and really start to collaborate against the process problems that we're seeing. And I think that's what you're talking about, is how do we all get on the same team?
Right. Right. Because you're right. It's a process problem and not a people problem. And to go along with that, when you attack a person, when the person isn't the problem and it's the process or the system, that person is well aware of the limitations that they're working under and typically just as fed up with it.
Yes.
I don't know a single nurse who has been working for a year or more who hasn't had a shift where at some point they were crying in the bathroom because they knew that they had so much load put on them that they could not care for their patients to the utmost degree of what they knew was doing a good job.
Right? Yeah.
So when you yell at that person for not doing good enough of a job, I've been on the receiving end of that, and I just want to scream back. I know. I know that things that shouldn't have happened. I know that those things should have got done. I didn't ask to take care of 6 other patients too.
Right.
And so that's where that dynamic goes sour very, very, very quickly.
It does. So I'm super excited to kind of jump in and talk about, like, how do we, because I think some of this, if you're listening and you're like, yeah, I know, but I can't seem to in the moment, right? In the moment, the only thing I know is to get angry at the nurse that did that, or at the doctor that didn't do that, or the hospital or whatever, right? And so what are some things I think this is where we can change that dynamic and really, and I think some of these things that we do as advocates will be very helpful to share, right? Is
Absolutely.
How do we do that in the moment? So what are some strategies that we can share with our listeners that will help them redirect and channel that frustration into productive and effective teamwork with providers to overcome the problems?
Yeah, so it does all come back to learning and practicing emotional regulation. And this is something that it's an active process to learn to manage your emotions. I know it's not something that I was explicitly taught growing up. Most people I know didn't learn mindfulness
right
as a kid. Like, these are all like skills and strategies we've been, they didn't teach us in school. We just kind of been figuring it out as we go. But again, how we were talking a few minutes ago about all of this coming down to communication.
Yes.
Keep being able to keep yourself mentally and emotionally in check so that you can have positive, collaborative communication is key. Number one, that is key. And number two, it's difficult and it's a learned skill that you have to practice all the time. However, it's also a skill that's applicable to really any interpersonal communication. This is not something healthcare specific. So it absolutely makes sense
Right.
to learn the skill and be practicing it across all aspects of your life. This really came to light for me when I started raising a toddler, but I found it to be incredibly helpful with my relationship with my husband, with some of the family members that I feel like I have a difficult relationship with. And then it has helped me tremendously in my work, both previously as a bedside nurse and now as an advocate. So being able to take that situation or that, that frustrating conversation or that thing that happened and be able to pause instead of react has been huge. That pause and ground yourself and breathe and think. And that is a muscle that certainly gets built up with time.
Yes. And like you said, it is practice. And I think that, even drawing that parallel to all of our relationships, hopefully is a helpful strategy, right? Because being in this situation in healthcare is not your first time. As listeners, this isn't going to be your first time being challenged like this. It's happened with your kids, with your in-laws, with your employer, right? So draw on some of those experiences and utilize some of the same techniques to help you get through that. I will say that in the hospital, as you were talking, I actually am thinking about my thought process. And how I've managed. My parents have both had surgeries pretty recently, and how I used that. And okay, I know that my mom is not the only patient that needs to be discharged today. I know that, and I know that the nurses are really trying to get these patients discharged. But I'm also thinking about what can I do to help my mom move up the list on the order in which patients are getting discharged, because I want her discharged earlier in the day. And, so it's okay to even ask what you can do to help.
Right.
Right? Is there anything that I can do to help process my mom's discharge? And sometimes there is, right? So anything that we can do that's going to put us on the same team, because the truth is, the nurse, the facility, the physician, they want the same outcome that we want. They want mom discharged home safely. They want mom treated well, right? So anything we can do to put ourselves on the same team. I've even been noted, anything. So ask the question, is there anything I can do to help?
Right.
And you'll be surprised on some of the things that will come back and yes, actually, could you, or whatever. But that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure I shared from my experience with, how to put myself on that team.
Yeah. Another big thing that I find super helpful is to focus on what is in your control and what you can do. And sometimes when it feels like nothing, just being there and being support for your family and being somebody that they can talk to you about how they're feeling, and you can approach that situation with empathy, and also just being a second set of ears and eyes and I'm going to say hands in the room. Because I know one thing I've shared before is, particularly when we're talking about a hospitalization, but also just with doctor's appointments, you should always have like a notebook or a journal to be able to take notes, so you have things to refer back to for those conversations later. So that's another thing that is in your power, is to be able to document. That way you can have further understanding and better communication with the team about the situation, because you'll have that good understanding about it. And then again, speaking from the experience as being a provider, when I see that a patient has family who is there, who is staying calm through situations and just speaking to me as a human, like Nicole just said, understanding that there's, the other patients on the floor, and unfortunately things have to be prioritized in a level of, what is like it's the triage system. Like things have to get addressed on the level of importance to the potential impact on life. So to say, if you're waiting for your mom to be discharged, but her, neighbor next door, or perhaps on the other side of the curtain, if you're in a shared room, is having a cardiac event, guess what? Your mom's not getting discharged right now, and screaming at the nurse isn't going to make it go any faster, because just like everything else in and around healthcare and all of life, like there's a finite amount of resources, and manpower is that resource that often gets forgotten about. But being able to stay calm and show, if you can just even talking with your providers and say, hey, I see that you're really busy with this thing over there. However, I am still looking for this thing for your mom. I'll tell you what, when I've been talked to that way, I'll make time to go delegate that task to somebody else, because thank you so much for bringing it back up on my list when it had gotten shuffled down, and being calm about that. There's a reason that they have that saying that you catch more flies with honey than vinegar.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
practicing those strategies to stay with the honey is going to be incredibly helpful. But also recognize your need to take a break. I would really encourage you, especially in a hospital setting where, your mom is there 24 hours a day for how many days?
Right.
Best as you can, try to find some other people who can be there with her, so you guys can kind of do shifts and take breaks, and it's not all on you. That's a prime time when you should consider having a professional advocate involved, because not only can they help offload some of that burden in making sure somebody is with mom, but they're the professional in handling those kind of situations and conducting those conversations, and can be really helpful for you, even just navigating your emotions and the overwhelm of what to do next. I know I have found out firsthand it is much more difficult to stay calm and in situations when it's you or your loved one, because those emotions get triggered, and that emotional piece of the brain overrides the rational piece of the brain, and the rational piece of the brain can't be there when the emotional is all flared up. You get that fight or flight triggered. So having another person, particularly an advocate, will be super helpful for you in those situations, so we can keep the team dynamic between the patient and the providers and get our best outcomes possible.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true, Kayla. I mean, just in our work as advocates, there's situations where, at least I have, and I'm sure you have too, had clients where I came in and didn't even necessarily do action-wise anything much different. The difference was the approach and the ability to take the emotion out of it. And so sometimes, I guess that's what I want to say too, is that there are times when it is so highly emotionally charged that bringing in a third party advocate really can diffuse things and get some forward moving traction, because the truth is sometimes those emotions are just too much to try and work
Absolutely.
through. And that's okay. That's why we're here at that professional level too. Don't forget that's why we're here, and to do those things too.
Oh yeah. No, I had a client who he called me in a panic because the call I got was, help, they're kicking my wife out of rehab and she can't even get out of the bed. And he probably should have made that phone call to me a lot sooner. He wasn't a client at the time. This was the reason he sought my services, because he could see that his wife was not ready to go home, and that was 100% valid and accurate. However, the approach that he took was, I didn't ask the details, but I'm pretty sure he got into screaming matches with the case manager. And so then, honestly, the case manager, who was totally overwhelmed and had too many patients to care for, did not really feel the incentive to go the extra mile on that patient's case. So this is a situation where, though he was trying to, speak to his wife's needs, it's all in the approach, and it ended up backfiring. He got me involved. The case manager was thrilled that she didn't have to talk to him anymore. He was thrilled to have somebody who, he trusted essentially on his side, because they had created quite an us versus them dynamic. And it honestly didn't take me that long talking to the insurance company to find a reason to keep her in rehab. And we ended up going through that a couple more times, so that by the time she did leave rehab, she was safe to go home. And everybody was happy. It was the ending we wanted. But yeah, absolutely. That is why we're here. I know sometimes that's not realistic, but
sometimes those emotions are too big, right?
Yeah.
Even we as advocates have to engage other advocates when we're in these situations.
Exactly. So, yeah, sometimes it's, even though I do this for a living, sometimes doing it for my grandmother is very challenging, because again, that it's so real, that emotion, and it just, once it's turned, that fight or flight is turned on, oh doggy.
Right? So true. So true.
Can be a challenge.
And that's why I kind of want to bring that in, and keeping it real, right? That level of emotion, no one is exempt from.
Oh yeah, that's 100%. Right? That's being a human.
Yeah. Yes. So it's okay.
The human experience. Yes, it is normal. There is nothing wrong with you. And it's not going to get us the best outcomes that we're looking for. So that's why we got to talk about it. So surround yourself with as much help as you can rally up. If it's not an advocate, is a professional advocate. Is it a friend, a family member? There's people in your lives who have said, hey, I'm always here, but they don't know what to do if you don't call them and reach out to them and actually specifically ask them for things. So all of those things to keep in mind: supporting your emotional regulation, get help around you, and know that this is very real. This is not an experience that's just happening to you. It's the providers, but we don't want bad outcomes to happen for you and your family.
Very much so.
So I hope that there were some helpful nuggets in this for you, and we will see you next week. Thanks for joining us here on How to Survive Healthcare. We hope you found this episode helpful and empowering.
If you're looking for even more resources and personalized support, head over to how2sh.com. That's how2sh.com. There you'll find tools, tips, and ways to connect with us directly.
Whether you need help organizing your medical information, understanding a bill, or navigating a tough healthcare decision, we're here to help.
And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, share it with someone who might need it, and leave us a review. It helps us reach more people just like you.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.